fit for circular economy objectives. That's important for us to know and will also greatly help the clients moving forward. Secondly, the sectors that I have highlighted on the right-hand side. The reason why the EU prioritized these sectors first and foremost is that these are the main emitters, the heavy emitters of the EU. So they're covering, as I've noticed here, around 93% of emissions. So when companies or sectors are slightly criticizing the EU for not covering them, for instance, seafood, as I mentioned, and the reason is only that it's not considered a heavy emitter by the EU, hence it has not been prioritized yet. So if you are working in a sector that is not yet classified, and you see that there are benefits of being classified, use your industry organizations. I think there is more and more sort of lobby in between the industry organizations and Brussels right now. So that's important to see how that market develops. Another element of that is the EU's now work on developing a brown taxonomy and a social taxonomy. These are things that are prioritized by the Commission now in 2021, and we're following that closely. Many of the sectors in Norway would probably benefit from the EU developing a brown taxonomy because it will be more highlighted what considers a transitional activity within the kind of browned area. Now, thirdly, the most important priority of corporate banking right now is reporting. Now, let me see if I can now shift to the next slide. Again,
okay, great. I think I just shifted it on Margareta, and there's also a couple minutes left.
Yeah, I cannot see that you have shifted, but that's okay.
I think it should. There's a lag. Sorry about that.
Yeah, fine. So what we have to underline the reporting requirements. I'll just leave you to shift it now, Alison, because I can't see it. It should be a slide with 3 different boxes and kind of how do you align the taxonomy, how you do reporting of taxonomy alignments on the slide right now. All right. It doesn't look like it's up from my end.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry about this problem. It's up now.
It's up to me. It's up. It's up.
Okay.
EU taxonomy alignment relevant for DNB and corporate clients. The 12 is 8 and 15%.
All right. Thank you so much. Now, so the reporting must be underlined. The taxonomy regulation includes a reporting requirement for financial institutions and large corporates, so currently more than 500 employees. And as a bank, we need to report the share of our loan portfolio that is deemed sustainable under these classifications or technical screening criteria set by the taxonomy. And that's what we call this taxonomy alignment. You will hear about taxonomy alignment throughout this seminar. And in Norway, the financial regulator, the Finanstilsynet, has proposed a sustainability reporting law to make this more transparent. And this one has special reference to the EU taxonomy. And that will also be on our agenda in 2021. Now, the details of this reporting is not defined yet, but we know when the Commission will then propose how to report on this in June 2021, we know that we have to report on the expenditures and earnings of taxonomy-defined activities. So on this slide, you see how that will be done in practice. We'll have to get that data from each and every one of our clients that falls into the scope of reporting. And that illustrates the greatest complexity of concern right now, the sustainability data, how we will gather that. So just one more final minute, Alison. If you take utility or power company, for instance, which is a sector that's well covered by the taxonomy right now, we would need to know from that client how much clean power production they have. Then we need to know proof that they don't hurt remaining goals, remaining objectives within the taxonomy, for instance, biodiversity. And we need to have proof that that activity meets social safety standards, which is also one of the requirements of being defined a taxonomy activity. So in DNB, we've begun to set up the IT systems. They need to be in place to gather all this data. But my advice to companies, if you're working in one of these companies that need to report, you should look into what type of financial data institutions need to put into their financial statements. And that can be a bit challenging and overwhelming. But if you look back to what Kim introduced by saying, is look at the big picture. There is a massive investment going into these sectors. And I've added a final slide, I don't have to show it here, with how this green market grows. So although today it's overwhelming, this is only a small proportion of activities, it's important to look at if we do manage to create a good reporting scheme on the taxonomy, we will quantify on the opportunities that lies ahead. Again, this is what I'll stop on that positive note, and I'll follow up with the slides. And sorry about the technical difficulties on this one.
Thank you so much, Anna Margareta. And we will definitely share the slides with everyone in a follow-up email after the event, so you can look through it after this. And so sorry about the technical difficulties. So next we will have Hilda Nordbu from Handelsbanken, and she will build on Anna Margareta's presentation and talk about taxonomy and what it's not. So Hilda is currently the head of sustainability at Handelsbanken, with experience as a consultant and project manager for large Norwegian companies in projects related to social responsibility and communication. So Hilda, we will share our slides, and if you can just take control on your end, then you should be able to navigate through it.
Thank you very much, Alison, and good morning, everyone. And thank you also to Global Compact for inviting us into this event. Also very happy to present after my former colleague in DNB, Anna Margareta. Thank you for your insight, and I'm sorry if I have some repetition of what she presented, but it's only like 4 weeks since we were colleagues, so there could be some overlap between our messages. But as you said, Alison, I just started in a new role as head of sustainability in Handelsbanken Norway. And we're kind of a small branch of a large Swedish bank. But this is a very interesting place to be right now because, of course, of the proximity of the EU, of Handelsbanken head office, and the fact that the regulatory changes will act into place a little bit before the Norwegian market, even though we are obliged to implement it according to Norwegian law. So in Norway, we are also mainly exposed through our lending to the real estate sector and also in private markets within savings. And this is, of course, also very relevant when it comes to the many changes that is just starting to take into place as a result of the EU Sustainable Finance Action Plan. So I thought that I would shed some light in the next 10 minutes on some common and maybe well-known misunderstandings or misconceptions that are sometimes under-communicated when it comes to the taxonomy. And also in the work on this, I think it's important to be reminded of, because in the search for solution to complicated work on integrating sustainability, one can easily be misled to thinking that the taxonomy will provide all the answers. And also, as Kim pointed out, that is not the fact. So I will point to two kind of main issues, and at the end, I will also talk very briefly about real estate and how the taxonomy is affecting the real estate as of now, and also very shortly on how that affects Handelsbanken's reporting moving ahead. And let's see if I can click forward, and if I cannot, could you please do that for me, someone, because I don't seem to have any kind of button for clicking on the next slide.
Yes, Hilda, if you just request control, it should let you share the slides since we have it on our end.
It's just that I have nowhere to click to request control. So if you could just please click for me, that would be perfect. And I will just let you know when you need to click.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So first of all, And as I said, you probably all know this, but it is important to stress that the taxonomy is about activities and not companies. And also, as Anne-Margrethe pointed out too, so far the taxonomy covers activities with the aim of reaching environmental objectives related to climate mitigation and climate adaptation. And this means that as the taxonomy starts to come into place, at least for the first two objectives, it does not make sense to use the taxonomy to say if a company is sustainable or not, if a company is green or not, or if it represents an ESG stock. Because in addition to being a classification for activities, it also currently mainly covers the climate aspect of ES and G. And all of us here know that in order to make a thorough evaluation of the sustainability performance of a company or activity, you need to take into consideration all the relevant, most material ESG issues, as well as, of course, the financial performance of a company. And secondly, if you could please then click. Yes. So as you can see here now, these are the currently covered sectors, as well that it now currently only covers the environmental sustainable activities, which is the E in the ESG. So if you could then please click one more time, as you've also seen some of this information on Anne-Margrethe's slide. And the next point is that the taxonomy is not being set up from the EU to be a mandatory list of sectors to invest in. So even though we have some sectors covered right now, this does not mean that other sectors will not be investable, so to say, in order to provide the solutions that the EU needs or that the world needs in order to solve all the problems that we now see related to sustainability. So if you can please click one more time. So if you look at these sectors that are currently covered by the taxonomy, what we can see is actually a roadmap on how the EU is trying to reach zero emissions in 2050. And it illustrates the required reduction in emissions for sectors within the EU that account for more than 90% of the emissions. And from a Norwegian perspective, one could then assume that activities or sectors left out of the taxonomy will be less attractive to investors, or in worst case, not be considered green or sustainable at all. And also, as Anne-Margrethe pointed out, fisheries and ocean industries will probably be included in the taxonomy in the next phase and perhaps within the year. But regarding whether or not the sectors included in the taxonomy so far is narrowing down the sustainability investment space, we see little indications of that so far. In fact, what we see is that the EU's ambitious plan and also now recovery plan after the COVID-19 is most likely helping to grow the market for sustainable financial products in general, and specifically within the bond market. So if you could please click. And what we have seen in the past 2 years, at least, is a massive growth in different kinds of sustainable financial products. And in the past year, a particular growth within sustainable and social bonds and linked loans. So even though the taxonomy will play a major part in this growing market moving forward, it is also clear that the demand and appetite for different kinds of products, different shades of green, if you will, is also there. And last year, we saw a very clear trend that non-real estate corporate issuers are increasing their green bond issuance. And this segment grew by 25% compared with 5% for real estate companies. And non-real estate issuers made up 57% of all corporate issuance in 2020. So talking a little bit about real estate then and the taxonomy, because the real estate sector is a very important part of the taxonomy and also the sectors that stand for a lot of the emissions. So there are some challenges when it comes to real estate, at least for the time being. So if you could please click, Alison. And some investors and issuers have expressed concern that if the taxonomy gets too stringent, it will outplay the actual intention of the taxonomy with increased transparency and comparability. And the current suggestion when it comes to real estate on the table has some perhaps unintended consequences, particularly for the Nordic markets. So for real estate, the technical screening criteria, which is what is kind of the threshold for what is supposed to be called green, in all categories are fairly in line with how the real estate criteria function in today's market, except for existing buildings. So what the Real Estate Commission, or what the Commission has proposed, is that when it comes to existing buildings, instead of using the first proposed top 15% approach within real estate, the suggestion is to use the EPC classification system and Class A being green. And as you can see from the slide, this is a problem because there is a significant difference in the EPC implementation across Europe. So for example, in the Nordics, only very few buildings have a certificate Class A or higher, whereas in other countries, more than 40% of the eligible buildings will then be classified as A. So many investors then say that the proposed change to existing buildings will severely limit the possibilities of real estate companies, municipalities, regions, and financial institutions in the Nordics to issue EU green bond. But we at least know that there are some plans to maybe change this. And I think that during March this year, the Commission have received a lot of feedbacks, I think 40,000 feedbacks related to the firstly proposed technical screening criteria. So there is some feedback that they will now propose a change in the real estate criteria and reversal to the top 15% approach. But there is no certainty surrounding this at this stage. And again, independent of what is decided upon, our impression is that investors are positive to a continued green financial market in the Nordic, based on the green bond principle, if the EU taxonomy would to a large extent then disqualify Nordic issuers relying upon existing buildings from issuing green bonds. Because then finally, talking about what the taxonomy actually is, it is important to remember that the taxonomy is not made to be static or inflexible. And of course, as with all politics, it includes battles and compromises and delays. But the taxonomy is made to be dynamic and responding to changes in technology, science, new activities, or to new data that we have access to. So as also Kim pointed out, the direction from the EU is clear, so there is no need to await for specific answers, because we will not have them at any stage, I think. And in order to be profitable in the long run, either way, and secure trust from all its stakeholders, all companies must to a certain degree identify and incorporate their most material sustainability aspects. So just then very briefly, finally, if you just click to my last slide, this is just one practical example of how we can then kind of dive into the taxonomy and use it in our reporting, at least on a group level at the beginning now. So what we then have done when it comes to our lending side, we could use green as a definition of how the lending book would look moving forward. But then, as we all know, the definition of green is will then be more or less a floating concept. So we will then use green as well as that the company must contribute to a sustainable transition in its own operations. And I think that we will need to see kind of examples of that, because it will be difficult to be able to classify at any point in time what kind of activities you have and how they're aligned with the taxonomy. So thanks for listening in, and I think that I will hand over the floor to Per Christian and KLP, and I think he will talk more about consequences and effect on asset management.
Yes, thank you so much, Hilda. It's really interesting to hear your perspective. Yes, so next we'll have KLP speaking on the taxonomy's effect on asset management and data sources for reporting. So we will have Per Christian Gilleshammer, who is an ESG analyst in the Samfunnsansvar department at KLP, and he has several years of experience from the asset management arm of KLP as well. So thank you, Per Christian.
Thank you, Alison. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
And the slides are appearing as we
hope. Yes, they look good.
Okay, so I noticed there's been some lag issues. I sent you the PDF. Could you post them in the meeting chat, perhaps, so people can follow along if there are more lag issues? Okay, then I'll just start. The taxonomy, wow, that's an exciting subject. With the coming of the taxonomy, asset owners and asset managers will finally have an official and scientifically based method of measuring how green our portfolios are and how green they are aiming to be. Although not without its challenges, the taxonomy is a highly sought after tool for KLP to guide capital to the activities and companies that contribute to the Paris Agreement. I'm on slide 2 now. I hope everyone can see that. So for my talk, I'd like to touch in on 3 things. The first part regards what everybody's thinking about when first hearing about the taxonomy. How green are we today? In this case, some numbers for 3 of KLP's funds and how we may calculate this, with some details from a published study from the Joint Research Commission. I'd also like to talk about what all of us are missing, data, and then I'd like to finish up with some thoughts on nuances not captured by the taxonomy, or shades of green, as I noticed Hilde like to call it as well. Slide 3. So with regards to measuring green, we don't have all the data we need yet to measure taxonomy alignment. I'll come back to the complexities in this regard later on. So we need to use some estimation-based methods to achieve this, and I've used 2 approaches. The first one is based on MSCI's ESG dataset, which uses MSCI's definition of green revenues and combines that with checks against OECD's guidelines, UN principles, and more. I won't go into the technical details on this method any further. However, the second measurement method is based on the taxonomy alignment coefficients created by Alessi and co-authors at the EU's Joint Research Commission's published study, which may be familiar for some of you out there. Now, the taxonomy alignment coefficients are very interesting because they provide estimates on the share of alignment in a NACE sector. So basically saying, with today's taxonomy rule set, which is not set in stone, how green is the NACE sector in the EU today? These are very interesting, as signals from the ESMA and EBA are that these coefficients may be used where taxonomy data is lacking. So then I'm on slide 4. So these are the NACE sectors and their coefficients for the activities which the study found that there was at least some degree of alignment today. I won't bore you with going into all of these. I would, however, like to just highlight a couple of them. Slide 5. The first one being one which I thought very interesting and which Hilde talked about as well, construction of residential and non-residential buildings. Real estate must be one of the most talked about sectors with regards to technical screening criteria. 40% was higher than I expected, but then I believe EU's issue is not with new buildings, but with old. Slide 6. The second I'd like to point out is production of electricity at only 21%. Now this seems very low, at least from a Norwegian perspective, although hydropower does have some significant hurdles to be taxonomy aligned. This number does nonetheless highlight the key issue here. These are estimates for the NACE sector as a whole in the EU and could be very wrong for some countries. The study has also found 48 activities that the study has concluded are not aligned at all. Some of them, such as the raising of camels and camelids, have little practical application, but others, such as data hosting activities having an alignment of 0%, paint a sort of bleaker picture. So, for our funds, using the methods I mentioned, I've looked into the taxonomy alignment for 3 of them. These are all passive equity funds. The first one is for our global developed markets large mid-cap fund, which has a taxonomy alignment of around 4 to 5%. Notable here is that the coverage is only around 20%, as in the coverage of the NACE activities only corresponds to 20% of the weight of the fund. The second one is our emerging markets large mid-cap fund with an even lower alignment from 1.8 to 4.3%, depending on the method, with just 14% coverage. The last one, global developed small cap fund with the highest alignment, around 5%, but with a coverage of around 30%. So not very high numbers, to put it mildly, and the only thing I am certain of is that these numbers are not correct, but could still give us an indication of where we can expect to be, around 5% or lower. Much of that comes from the taxonomy's presently limited scope, but some of it reflects that taxonomy economy today just isn't sustainable. My findings are also in line with what the JRC found as well. Slide 8. The green share of EU equity and corporate bond markets estimate is less than 5%. Now, this doesn't say anything about where the tax companies are headed, the capex dimension of the taxonomy, but still somewhat chilling numbers. Slide 9. So if we were to do a proper taxonomy evaluation on these 3 funds alone, 7,000 plus companies, in a couple of years, we would expect to need the contribution to the 6 different environmental objectives, the revenue dimension, preferably split into 3 categories: sustainable on its own, transition and enabling activities. Then there's even more potential granularity coming with the gray and brown criteria. And then there's the whole capex and any relevant opex dimension. And then on top of that, there's the potential social taxonomy. That's quite a lot of data, new type of data, which the taxonomy will force into the market, which asset owners and managers must get from somewhere. So I was ready to pop the champagne when I first heard slide 10, by the way. So I was ready to pop the champagne when I was first heard about the EC's plan to create the European single access point, which I understand will be a non-stop shop for all financial and non-financial data one would need. Not much has been heard from the EU on this part, but we at KLP are following it closely. However, we need to be a bit cautious in our expectations for the ESAP, as there are many questions still remaining. Will it cover enough of our needs? Will it be there in time? And will it be all we want it to be? I am afraid that the answer to at least one of those questions is no. So KLP will need to source data from other data sources as well, especially here in Norway. Finally, on shades of green, the taxonomy is very strict and restricted in its scope, although hopefully the establishment of gray-brown criteria and the social taxonomy will help. But this means that we will be in situations where we need to assess an investment where the activity does not have criteria, but we strongly believe that it is sustainable in some way nonetheless. This means that we would need to create a sustainable but not taxonomy sustainable tag. But then we're back to one of the main issues the taxonomy is trying to assess, potential greenwashing. And we're back to square one. In conclusion, I worry that we will never see the end of greenwashing. There will still be gaps left by the taxonomy, opening up for other brands of terms that might mislead. But will it make it easier to say how sustainable our portfolio is? Certainly. We welcome the taxonomy as a common language and criteria for talking about sustainability, and will certainly report on our portfolios and their taxonomy alignment. We will also be relying on the taxonomy to be the standard with regard to sustainability going forward. So that was that for me, Alison. Hope it was okay.
Yes, thank you so much, Per Christian. It was great to hear KLP's perspective, especially with those really interesting studies. So our last speaker for today is Hannah Thornham from EY, and she's going to talk about incorporating taxonomy from EY's perspective. So she's a partner at EY and a leader for climate change and sustainability services in Norway, with more than 14 years of experience supporting companies and investors in developing sustainability strategies, setting goals, and taking action. And she played an important role in pushing the development and emphasizing the importance of sustainability management and reporting in Norway. So thank you, Hannah. We're really looking forward to hearing your presentation. And I think you just need to unmute yourself.
Okay, unmuted, I hope.
Mm-hmm.
Then showing the slides. Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be here. Very happy we're talking about this topic this morning. As some of you know, it's my favorite topic at the moment, and I'm sure it is for many of you. And I also want to kind of underline that why this is such an exciting topic in a way is that it's part of a bigger plan. It's part of a quite cunning plan, I would say, for the EU to mobilize 1 trillion euros. And this is what Ursula von der Leyen said about a year ago now. And it also says that she wants to, with this, unleash a green investment wave. So it's very exciting times, and I think we can already see that it's having an effect, even if the final draft is not ready yet. And I think what's very clever about it is that it's creating a common language for us to speak about our green future and where we want to be. And just to talk about what really is green. And for financial institutions, this will, for example, be that you could say that hopefully sometime in the future, 70% of the fund's investments are taxonomy aligned. Or even talk about risk in terms of how taxonomy aligned your investments can be. And also for companies, this will be a way of telling the market and everyone else that perhaps 40% of our business activities are taxonomy aligned, and we have a goal to increase this to 60% within 3 years. It could be one statement. And also to explain to the market how the company is preparing to become more aligned to these criteria. So even if it doesn't feel like it at the moment, I believe that the taxonomy will help simplify how we talk about being green. And in a way, we could say that it hopefully will bring some structure to the current green anarchy that we have. And I wanted to show you this slide that was shown this week as part of the European Commission's many webinars on explaining the EU taxonomy. Maybe you didn't all have time to spend 2 days watching these seminars, but one of the interesting slides that they showed was this one that really kind of illustrates the purpose of the taxonomy for a company. And so they defined this hypothetical company that they named Eureka. And as you see, for Eureka, when they mapped their activities against the taxonomy in 2020, they have found that 20% of their activities are aligned with the taxonomy. And it's also shown that that's basically one of their sites that they've found are aligned with the criteria. But they want to be more aligned, so they've then set a goal to be 50% aligned with the taxonomy within 2025, which means that they, which practically means that they want to update one of their other sites to also follow the same criteria. And what this also shows, which I think is quite useful, is that what they then need to do is, of course, to invest. And they need to then also make sure that those investments are taxonomy aligned. So that explains why there's this focus on CapEx, so capital expenditure. So that they will here, in order to reach their goal for 2025, have 80% of their CapEx taxonomy aligned. So what is it that companies and investors will need to do practically? First of all, large companies in the first instance will need to map the current status of green activities. And this is required for large companies in the EU in the first instance, and hopefully in Norway soon, but we'll see whether that is will follow the same timeline as the EU, or maybe a lag a year or so. But this will also be relevant for companies seeking green financing that follow the criteria of the taxonomy. Secondly, companies and investors will need to report the current status of green turnover, or turnover that is aligned with the taxonomy, and investment, that is CapEx and OpEx. And then is the kind of third step, which is voluntary, but will not be natural for ambitious companies seeking green financing, and that is to set goals and also to make green investment plans to become more taxonomy aligned. So on the first two stages, to map and report, this is the process that we are working with now in EY. And the first stage, of course, is to help a company to identify whether their sector is covered by the taxonomy, and then to understand which NACE codes are relevant. So sectors are defined through NACE codes in the taxonomy. And then to also uncover which activities are specifically relevant. Once we've identified these NACE codes and activities, we can do the three-level test. First, does the activity substantially contribute to those two first goals that have been defined, climate mitigation or climate adaptation? Secondly, does the activity have any adverse or any harm on these other goals? And then thirdly, to check, does the activity also adhere to the minimum safeguards, which are basically human rights and social aspects and guidelines. Then the last part is then to report. And the requirement will be to report first the turnover that is aligned, CapEx, and then OpEx if that's relevant. And for companies in the EU, this will need to be reported next year, basically for the fiscal year 2021. And more details on the integration in the European reporting requirement will be ready in June, or is said to be ready in June 2021. And then the third aspect of setting goals and making plans, I think will be a key activity area going forward now. And I wanted just to show you some of the criteria that is in the taxonomy for two different sectors. These are just some examples of the criteria for these sectors. And basically, this is the starting point for setting these goals. So if you are a hydropower company and you are building new power plants, you want to then make sure and set goals to make sure that the power density is above 5 watts per square meters, and also that the life cycle emissions are below 100 grams CO2 per kilowatt hour. And if you are in the real estate business and you're building new buildings, you want to make sure that the energy requirements are according to this, which is that the primary energy demand is 20% lower than the nearly zero energy building. And this is also where this is an example of where the different requirements that are set in the EU will need to be adapted to the Norwegian situation. So we don't use this standard in Norway yet, so we will make sure that we have equivalent standards to refer to. And for this, for example, this will possibly be a new BREEAM standard or an ANOVA certification. And also, if you're building new buildings, you will need to make sure that 70% of the materials are recyclable, which I think is a stretch for quite a few projects. But this is also an example of the kind of the level of the requirements. Because, and the idea, of course, is to push us into the future. So these requirements need to be ambitious. And finally, I just wanted to also say that, you know, the same steps for sustainability reporting still applies, but that the taxonomy is a useful addition to to how we report. So normally this is the process that we would follow for a sustainability report. First starting by understanding the impacts through the value chain of a company. And here the taxonomy will be useful in giving an indication of what the main environmental impacts can be. Also, secondly, we normally look at risks and opportunities for the company related to ESG. And the taxonomy will give a clear indication probably of where the world will be going. So this is also useful in that stage. Then you can set indicators for your most material topics, and the taxonomy also gives quite good indicators for some of the most important topics. Then develop your report, and hopefully more and more companies will also get assurance for this reporting. So thank you very much for listening, and good luck, everyone. You can do it.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for that great presentation. We have just a few minutes left in the meeting now, and as you know, there's the EU's webinars continuing on the EU taxonomy starting at 10, so we want to make sure everyone has time to get there. So now we will just have some closing remarks from UN Global Compact Norway. So I'll just introduce Knut, who is our COO, to give some final remarks. And thank you again for everyone's great presentations today.
Thank you very much, Alison. Thank you everyone for joining in. I think that apart from being a very interesting, some very interesting details about the taxonomy, it gives us an open road ahead to try to influence, especially the sectors that are important to Norway, being it the maritime sector. On the financial side of things, we are, as Kim mentioned, we are working on the UK-Norway Sustainable Finance Action Platform, where one of the main action tracks will be on reporting and standard setting, but also in the ocean. The second cycle of our ocean platform, we are looking into 3 main areas, which will be blue finance, taxonomy, and then scope 3 reporting science-based targets. So know that we in the UN Global Compact are working on this. Please reach out to us if you have interest in joining any of our platforms, any of our networks, and we will take that chat. But rest assured that we are working every day to understand the taxonomy and have an impact on the taxonomy and help our member companies adapt to the taxonomy. And we are also in the midst of planning the launch of an action center where we would help the transition of these companies together with some large financial actors in Norway, as to get companies away from divestment and into investment onto investment lists and help them in the transition. And that will be the last words from me today, or at least in this meeting. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or want to know more about the UN Global Compact. So thank you to Alison, thank you to the speakers, and thank you to all of you for listening in.
Thank you so much, Knut. So I hope everyone has a good day and gets a chance to see the rest of the webinars. And we will send out an email with the speaker slides and a little bit more information. So thank you everyone for coming, and have a nice day.
Thank you, bye-bye.
To Alison, let's just go through the
Knut, I'm trying to end the meeting now. Sorry, it's right about to end. But I will call you again in a minute.